to the Microforce Deep Scratch Removal training video. The Microforce discs were developed to help remove deeper scratches on production lines, construction sites, etc. Really anywhere where deep scratch removal may occur. If you're already using our Gforce polishing system, we encourage you to continue using the Gforce polishing process for light to medium scratches. But when you run into a deeper scratch that will really hang your nail, certainly that is a great opportunity to use the Microforce discs. They're formulated with micro abrasives which allow you to remove even deep scratches with minimal to no distortion if used properly. So today's video is going to focus on that technique that will give you the proper function and the best possible result. The first thing before you start any deep scratch removal is to make sure you've got your safety equipment. Of course, you'd like to have a dust mask because we are working with glass and glass particles to prevent inhaling any glass particles. Obviously your ear protection as well, since we are working with a power tool, and of course your safety glasses too to protect your eyes. This here is a piece of tempered glass, but this Microforce process will work on really any type of glass: laminated glass, annealed glass, mirror glass, starfire glass, even Gorilla Glass. So now we're going to take a 100 grit aluminum oxide sanding disc and kind of fold it up here and put a little bit of pressure on it and create a nice substantial scratch right here in the middle of this piece of tempered glass. So here we go. You can see we got a substantial scratch here. You can see kind of the white cloudiness from all of those scratches. And from certain angles you can see a little shimmer too from the little sparkle effect that some of those scratches have created. So now you can kind of grab it with your fingernail here. You can feel it and even hear it. There's a myriad of little scratches there, but they're all relatively deep here. This is definitely deeper than something you would typically run into in a production setting. Would be more of like a construction grade scratch. At this point, we're about to start removing the scratch using the Microforce discs, but first off we want to explain the technique we're going to use. We're going to be moving right to left with crossing patterns, kind of like a lawnmower from top to bottom across the scratch, working across the scratch rather than up and down the scratch, and working in kind of a horizontal or rectangular motion. Rather than a circular or a square motion. This will help to dissipate out any possible optical distortion in a manner that won't be visible or very minimally visible to the human eye. So the first thing is to select the first disc that we're going to use. In this case, since it's a relatively deep scratch, I'm going to start with the most aggressive Microforce disc. Now this would also work for even deeper scratches as a first step, but in this case we're going to start with the 180 Microforce and the 3-inch backer pad. So we're just going to stick that on there. It's a hook and loop, so relatively easy to use. Now this is your water feed system, which I'm sure you're familiar with using the Gforce2 system. And I'm just going to hold the button down and put my hand over the top and kind of soak the disc with water. The reason for that is we want the disc to be nice and wet before we start the process. And as we start polishing, we're just going to kind of let the disc dry out relatively. So you can see it's nice and wet there, ready to roll. And that'll help it to kind of bite against the glass as soon as we start. Now we should be ready to go. So we're going to go ahead and turn it on the glass and start the process. Again, working right to left or left to right across the scratch. Okay, so you notice that we use water every maybe 5 to 10 seconds, just a small amount. Mainly we let it dry out and then just using water semi-occasionally. Now it's important that we clean the disc once to remove all of this white kind of glass buildup on the surface before continuing to the next step. And the best way to do that is to either put your hand over the disc like we did just there and fill it with water, or you can use the Gforce spray bottle, which is probably the easiest way to do it, and just kind of soak the disc with water so that you can get all of that debris off of there as best as you can. And that will allow the disc to now be used again to continue taking the scratch out, and we'll just continue on. Occasionally you'll want to check the glass temperature and see where you're at. Right now we're in about 140 degrees. In most cases on tempered glass you'll want to be around 175 or slightly under, and on annealed glass under 155, 150. So you can adjust that just by pressing less on the machine as you operate. So at this point the scratch is gone. We've got a consistent haze from top to bottom and somewhat of a rectangular shape. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and mark it from behind and continue on to the next step. So since we started with the 180 disc, we're always going to skip a step. So we're going to skip the 360 and we're going to go up to the 500. So we're just going to apply the 500 disc here. Follow the same procedure we did with the first one, which is completely soak it. Kind of put our finger or hand over the surface and let the water kind of fill that disc with water. So it's nice and wet. Once that's the case, like it is now, we're going to go ahead and now our focus is going to be mainly softening these edges right around where the line is. And of course we're going to work the center as well, but primarily our focus is going to be the edges. Okay, so now we'll clean it up. We should have a nice clean transition now between the first disc, the 180 disc, and the 500 disc. Okay, so now you can see we've finished that second stage and we're ready to polish this clear. Just a note here, on a slightly less deep scratch we would not have gone quite as far out. On a deeper scratch we may go even just a tad bit further out, or maybe even using a 5-inch disc to get a wider area. But for this particular scratch we've reached a good point here, and so in some cases if you have a very deep scratch and you have a larger area, you might want to create a little grid or kind of an X in these circles and then polish each of those 4 sections. But in this case we're just going to leave it as is. So now we're going to continue on to the polishing phase. As you can see, I've already installed my 3-inch Gforce polishing disc here. This is also available in a 2-inch. But since we've done the majority of the Microforce process with the 3-inch, I'm going to stick with the 3-inch. We can use either clearing compound or polishing compound. However, polishing compound is primarily for the one-step scratch removal process. Clearing compound is formulated specifically for this, clearing the glass. Kind of cake it in there real good. Press it into the pores of the disc. Just like so. Not a lot of it caked up on the surface, but a little bit's not going to hurt anything. And then we're going to use a little bit more water on this process than we would on the Microforce discs and start it up. Okay, so now we have finished polishing this surface. If we just wipe the glass clean, we should have a relatively finished piece of glass here. If we notice any additional areas that need a little bit of polishing, we can continue, but I think this is going to look pretty good. Okay, our scratch that was right here in the center is no longer visible. I'm looking through the side, looking up and down, and I don't see any noticeable optical distortion. So a successful repair with the Microforce discs. As you can see on this piece of glass we have a tempering logo. So our Microforce disc will also work great for removing this type of logo, or logos on windshields, or logos on annealed plate glass, insulated glass, windows and doors. There are a couple of different types of logos, but this particular type is a sandblasted. There are also ceramic buildup, and there are some other kind of more superficial types as well. Since this is a sandblasted, typically the sandblast and the ceramic ones, you need to use a slightly more aggressive disc. On the ones that are really just kind of a paint or superficial acid etch, you could start with the 360, but in this case we will start with the 180 and then continue on to the 500. Now we are going to use the 2-inch disc, the 2-inch Microforce disc here, and along with the water feed system, and we're just going to polish a much smaller area. In this particular area we're not as concerned about distortion because it is such a small area that's not exposed typically to your line of sight. And we'll go ahead and start that process. Again, kind of wetting the disc, making sure it's good and wet so it'll bite onto the glass, and then we'll get it rolling. Okay, that logo is now gone, so we'll clean the surface. Make sure we got a nice consistent edge. And then we'll swap it out for the 500 grit Microforce 2-inch disc. Again, soaking the disc. And then we're going to polish just the edges and the center. Okay, so now we'll clean the surface again, and we will continue on to the clearing compound just like we did with the scratch removal. And once we've got that on there, then we're going to go ahead and start. And we should be good to go. There we go, logo is now fully removed. Now that we've completed our deep scratch removal training module with the Microforce discs, let's recap what we have available in this particular product. The 5-inch disc Microforce is available, the 3-inch and the 2-inch variety, all for different applications. The 5-inch is primarily used for deep scratch removal like graffiti removal or large areas. The 3-inch is probably the most popular for typical scratch removal, and the 2-inch is great for logo removal and other small spot areas. We also have them available in 4 grits, 180, 360, 500, and 1000. And generally you will want to skip a grit. So that those steps would be, for instance, 180, 500, and then polish, or 360, 1000, and then polish. Thanks again for your attention to the Microforce Deep Scratch Removal training video.